just, wow.
And this is where you start to really see the benefit of compound interest, because it's showing you that you put in a total of $52,000. So you diligently put your $50 in a fortnight over 40 years. But because you got to take advantage of capital growth and income, and look at that snowball, most of the return here, $233,000, was not actually your money at all. It was from growth and income. So that's a lot of money for just putting $50 a fortnight away on a regular basis.
Hey everyone, so today is part 2 of our finance episode with Kate Campbell, who's from How to Money podcast as well as Australian Finance podcast. So last week was an introduction into finance. For beginners, no matter whether you're confident or not confident, it's just a really good ease into things like superannuation and investments and just how to be more conscious of your money and where it's going. So I would really, really recommend listening to that before this one if you're unsure about money. Otherwise, if you know what, you do you. Just go ahead with what you want to do. So today is going to go into the nitty-gritty of superannuation and investments and really the practical side of it. Remembering though, it is general advice only. So why is that? Well, Kate explains here.
Australia has really, really tight laws on what's personal and what's general advice, which is why I'm not going to be telling you right now which is the best ETF or which is the one I use personally, because that suddenly does become advice. I think there are some...
Have I done that? Have I actually inadvertently broken the law in any way?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
You can talk about different...
Oh boy. Okay, so haven't broken any rules. I am a good standing citizen. Also, this episode will contain screen sharing, much like last episode, and it's all about that money calculator, which is really good fun, but it's mainly fun if you have the YouTube version or you're watching via the YouTube version instead of listening. Because it just won't make sense otherwise. So that link for the YouTube video is in the show notes. And I think that is it. Let's jump into it.
Okay, if you won the lottery, what would you do with the money? Because I know for a fact it is very different to what a lot of people would do is spend it on a car and then spend it on this. And so what would you do, Kate?
How much have I won?
Oh, very true.
It's going to be very different.
Oh, okay. That's a very interesting point then. I'll give you 2 values. One is a classic million, and I'll think of another.
Just a mil?
Yeah, just a
cheeky mil.
So, what would you do with $1 million?
I think now, because I know what $1 million, like the financial security, $1 million can give you a base level of financial independence, because you can withdraw 4% a year and it can continue indefinitely. So I could have at least 40 grand a year to live on. I'd invest it all. And I know that I'm sort of set for life, whatever I choose to do with my career. I mean, $1 million invested would completely change your family's future for generations to come, hopefully. Most people don't do that though. Most people would end up like loaning the money to people and never getting it back, or going on holidays, or buying, as soon as you buy a house, like that $1 million is gone. Yeah. So I guess I would invest it. Maybe I'd spend like 10 or 20 grand on a holiday, but at the moment I can't go anywhere. Yeah, maybe.
Yeah. I'm interested though, the value that you gave, 4% from that 1 mil. What gives you that value as opposed to 10% or as opposed to other ones?
Yeah, so 4% it's like the Trinity study that happened in the US a while back. I mean, there's some debate about whether that's still applicable today, but it's a lot of people in the financial community will use that as like a potential safe withdrawal rate from that amount. So let's say you've got your $1 million in sort of a growth fund or invested in growth assets, and you can probably expect to return 7% on average per year. And so by taking only 4% of your capital, or 4% out as income, you're not cannibalizing the $1 million. So you can like keep that $1 million and keep growing it over time, albeit a bit more slowly, but you can still take 40 grand a year out without having to worry that you're slowly eating up the $1 million.
So you would, and you said that you would invest. So would you invest the 1 mil completely and then take from that investment 40 grand per year? Is that what you meant?
Yeah. So you might just put $1 million completely in a diversified, high growth exchange traded fund portfolio or something similar to like that.
So I think a lot of you just dissociated from this phrase.
Diversified, high growth exchange traded fund portfolio.
Which is totally understandable. And if this completely blew over your head, don't worry, because Kate and I are going to discuss this in detail. So hold on and we'll get to it.
So you could sell enough of your portfolio so you can take out 40 grand each year. But it still keeps growing because it's growing at a rate greater than 4% a year. So yeah, I guess it's like a lot of people think about that when they're coming up to retirement, is how much can they live on each year without slowly eating the $1 million or whatever they've got in their super.
Right. Then going on the other end, then less than 1 mil, say 500,000. Again, would that be the same philosophy as what you did for 1 mil?
Yeah. I mean, 500,000. If you invest it, that'll change your life. If you just start giving some to family, if you buy even in Melbourne, 500,000 might get you a 1-bedroom apartment. So you might not even be buying a house with it. You could use it as a deposit. But yeah, if you don't use that 500,000 wisely, it'll disappear in a year or two. But if you do invest it wisely, well, it can change your financial future.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And we will talk about the smart ways of investing now. Yeah. I was looking at the list of my questions and I'm like, is this something? No, we're going straight.
My lottery answers are probably kind of boring.
No,
what someone else would do.
And honestly, I got asked this question 3 days ago, and my answer, it was an icebreaker question for the start of the day. Yeah.
Yep.
And I answered with, I would spend some money on something I enjoyed. Maybe a bike. No, definitely a bike. And then I would invest the rest. And I would invest it in ETFs. And we will go into what ETFs are. But first of all, what we referenced before was super.
So before we jump into super, if you're really beginner or if you just don't know much about super, I would really recommend listening to last episode, which we just introduced the idea of super as well as other money concepts and why it's important. So, but if you're a rebel, whatever, screw it. Let's just keep going.
Super is one of the most overlooked things just because of the fact that everyone has it. If you have a stable income and you're privileged enough to have that, super is going to be part of your life. And what I didn't realize was that super was an investment. I thought super was just people holding my money as cash, as just something that didn't grow at all, which in hindsight now just doesn't make sense because I would be left with $2,000 at my retirement. And so what's the investment segment or portion of super?
Yeah. So with superannuation, like many other financial products, there's different fund managers. So you might have heard of some of the big ones. Now, I'm not giving you any recommendation here. I'm just going to chuck out a few big names of industry super funds. We've got Australian Super, Hester, Host Plus, NGS, Care Super. There's some of the names off the top of my head. And they're big, massive superannuation funds. And what they do is they actually manage the money on your behalf. So for most of you, you won't actually be able to manage your own superannuation, although that is a possibility if you have quite a lot of money in your super. But I won't really talk about that today. So you've got your $3,000 in your super right now, and someone has to look after it and manage it on your behalf. And so all these big superannuation funds, they have different offerings, they have different fees, they have all sorts of investment options that you can choose from. So for most people, you can actually choose your superannuation fund, which you don't always know, because at your job, if you don't choose a super fund, you get given the default fund that workplace has chosen, and that's maybe because they have a connection. So some of the super funds historically have been, like some of the super funds were for health industry professionals, and some were for education, and some for union or trades. And so you would end up just in the default, usually the balanced fund.
So very sneakily, these balanced funds usually have the highest fees, which is interesting because they're the default. And I've ranted about my own experiences with my super company, or at least the one that I was previously with. I even made a YouTube video in the height of my frustration. But there are plenty of other things to take into consideration. But yeah, just know that the balance fee is the highest fee, and then decide what to do with that information.
And so you would end up just in the default, usually the balanced fund of the superannuation fund of your employer's choice. But for most people now, you can actually just tell your employer, I want you to pay my money into this super account, and they just do that. So once you've got your super, so we're under super company XYZ, and then within that super company, they'll offer maybe a dozen if it's a really big one, or if it's a small one, maybe just a handful of different investment options. And that's when you get even more choice. So firstly, you can choose the superannuation fund manager, so the big overhead that actually manages the money, and
so
they employ staff. So different companies. So they have lots of employees, they have lots of staff. They offer they give you customer support. They have analysts that pick where to invest the money. So they've got whole teams that deal with that. So you can pick the overall company that manages your super fund. And then you get another choice, is what your super is invested in itself. So you can choose to have the money in many super funds in cash. I think as someone that's young, cash, without sort of giving financial advice, cash is a very dangerous option, because if you put your money into cash and you leave your superannuation there for 40 years, it's not going to do anything.
And just to clarify, so cash, because when I was starting, I had no idea what the difference between cash and other things were. So cash is just cash, money, sitting there, not growing because it's not invested in anything. Is that right?
Yeah. It's just sitting there in massive lump of money in bank accounts. And a lot of people actually do have cash. And I know retirees do use it a bit more strategically because they're actually having to take money out each year. But a lot of people got scared last year at the start of COVID and did change their money to cash. And the scary thing is that a lot of people will then forget that they ever did that change. And for the next 10 or 20 years, their money just might not grow inside of their superannuation. And so you'll have cash in large super funds. So let's just pretend I'm talking about a large super fund here. You'll have maybe a conservative fund, and then usually we'll go up from there. We might have a growth, we might have a high growth, we might have an aggressive.
So I've actually just slotted in the bit where Kate and I screen share and discuss the types of funds on the AusSuper website. We're doing it real time, so it just flows on from this, I guess. And we're on the AusSuper website, not because we're endorsed by them or sponsored, though AusSuper, you're most welcome. But AusSuper, just because it's one of the bigger super funds. And we just got here by Googling investment options AusSuper, and then picking their pre-mixed investment options, and then starting with the balanced fund.
Different ones.
So they've got 90% of their members in their balanced options. So a lot of people are imbalanced. It may not be the best option for you, so I would investigate all of the options as well.
Right. So we mentioned high growth.
So that's often the one that they'll say 10, 20, 30-year time frame. That'll be the high-risk product. But most of your money will be invested directly in Australian and overseas investments through the stock exchange, and that will have the highest, generally, return over a long period of time, because you'll be able to see the performance chart and never look just at 1 or 2 years. Always click, it'll tell you, like when you can select the time frame, it'll say like 1, 3, 5, all. Always click all, and you want to see what the returns are over time, because everyone can have one really good year or one really bad year, but it takes a bit more work to have good consistently over 10 or 20 years.
There's a socially aware I haven't heard of.
A lot of super funds are starting to offer more ethical overlays on their super funds, or like ESG, which is environmental social governance. They'll look at those factors when they decide what they invest in.
Awesome. So Yeah, I do also know they have ethical super, which is also specifically for ethical shares. There's index diversified, there's conservative balance, which we talked about. So a lower growth, however, more stability. And then they have stable.
Different funds will call them different names. Like stable might be their version of conservative.
Yeah.
But you can scroll down and find out more details as well.
Oh yeah, so this is what you would be investing in, and they just give you a breakdown of everything. And generally cash is bigger with stable or conservative.
So you got 25% of your super in that option is invested in cash.
Yeah.
And then 30% fixed interest, so bonds and things like that.
So if we were to go into high growth, it would be much different. Cash is only 3% as opposed to a 25%.
And so you have a lot more exposure to Australian and international shares. You've got a bit of private equity there. That's always a bit of a mystery what that actually is. But then you've also got some direct property. So they're owning probably some buildings and different things, infrastructure. They might have warehouses. Sometimes people own like harbours or ports. All sorts of super funds get up to a bit of fun in terms of what they've got. So much money, they can invest in some more interesting things. And then maybe you've got some cash and bonds in there as well. So it's quite an interesting pool of different investments. Sometimes they'll have like recommended investment time frame. So they'll say cash might be for someone who needs their money in the next year. Conservative might be someone that needs their money in the next 5 years. So they can give you guidelines and indications of like, this is a high risk or a low risk product. This should be a 20-year time frame investment. They might do different things, but they're not going to tell you you can only do this or this.
Okay, so now changing tracks, we're going to discuss the fees for our super accounts.
I find it very dangerous sometimes with super, especially with our first job. So for me, I worked first in Cotton On, and they gave me a super fund. Little did I know though, and I made a YouTube video of this way back, which covered the fact that I was paying absurd fees I didn't know. I just assumed super was just super and it would be the same for everywhere. But they were making my balance go into the negatives, first of all. I was paying for an advisor I had no idea about. And my investments were so conservative that I was making absolutely no money from it. So this combination just stressed to me that this is happening to a lot of different people unknowingly, because if you just stick with the same super and never check it ever, by the time you retire, you'll realize that you would have lost out on a lot of money just by not choosing the big super fund at the start and just making sure that the fees don't accumulate over time, because they are quite big. I remember there were fees for using the service, so using the big super fund. So that's already a fee, which changes depending. I remember there was also another fee, which was the investment fee. So by being part and by taking control of this investment, you have to pay a fee to actually invest in it. And they also change depending on the investment type. And all of these things, I just didn't know at all until I researched. And this seems like a lot of information, but to the people who are listening or watching, that was research and it was hard. However, I am in hindsight so glad that I did it, because I would have been very much in the negatives or very low, if anything.
There are a lot of fees to be aware of. And I mean, as you mentioned, there's like an administration fee, which is often like a set. It might be $1.50 a week or $2, depending on what the fund is. And then so that it gets a bit confusing, because they'll have a set fee, like this is XYZ dollars per week or per month, plus they'll have a percentage fee for the investment management, as you said. And that will be different depending on different funds, because it costs them more to run certain products. Like running a cash fund's pretty cheap, but maybe running their high growth fund costs a bit more because they're doing a bit more weirder stuff inside of it. So being aware of those fees, plus you can add on advice fees to your super fund. Also insurance. So you might go in and then realize, oh, you're paying, you've got life insurance, you've got total permanent death and disability insurance, you've got income insurance, you've got trauma insurance. If you're in your 20s right now, what insurance, like you might actually really want certain insurances, but just making sure you're not paying them by default. You're actually having a conversation with yourself and go, I want this insurance. And I've got the right level of cover, because you can always change those things as well. So there's a few websites now, which I can provide to you later for the show notes, but they allow you to compare super funds a little bit more easily. So you can go, hey, this is what I'm currently in. I'm in the XYZ fund balanced option. And maybe I want to compare it with this other industry fund's growth option. Like, what are the returns? What are the fees? What are the insurance options? And then you can have a look at the different options available and what might be a better fit for you.
Mm-hmm. Super, super important. I hope that people listening to this do take that advice on board, because an hour, as you mentioned in the last episode, an hour a week or something just to manage that will save you so much time and effort down the line.
Yeah, super is so important.
Mm-hmm. And just to basically recap the idea of super. So we automatically get allocated a super fund, a big branded super fund, and we can choose to leave at any time. I personally did that. There are fees, but in the long term, it's worth it. Or they manage our super fund. They invest in either conservative, growth, high growth, aggressive, all of these different funds that we can choose whether or not to invest in. And there's plenty of difference in fees, difference in the actual returns that you get. And then also make sure that you're not paying for things that you actually don't use. So for example, an advisor if you don't need an advisor, or insurance if you don't need insurance.
And now Kate and I just compare the different funds on the money calculator just to see how much it changes things.
So if we go into our superannuation calculator, this is so much fun. I'm just going to do this. You and your super fund age. Why is the age important?
Because that's how many years you've got to compound.
That's true. Okay, let's say they're 21 and the income. Oh, good question.
I don't know if they got their first job. Are they on 40 grand, 50 grand?
Yeah. Oh, there's a flight. Okay. Yeah. Let's say 40,000. Desired retirement age. Yeah. Let's just say 67. Super balance as of currently, let's say, is 1,000. So admin fees. See, this is where the PDS would come in handy, because they tell you all the fees.
Yeah.
So the PDS is actually just a legal document about the super fund and really everything you need to know about it. So the fees, what they're investing in, all of that jazz. So to find that, you would just you'd insert the super fund name, and then after it, write PDS, which is the product disclosure statement.
Right. And so this is literally real time what I would do if I was considering going into Oz Super and using their thing. I would type in indexed, diversified Australian super PDS. Oh, now this is the hard bit, and they make PDSs not so fun to look at.
Yeah, I control F is my friend when it comes to PDS.
True. Yeah, let's just go with balance then.
We've got a administration fee
of $2.25 per week.
Plus, that makes it a bit hard. See, when they have set dollar fees plus percentage fees, you definitely need a calculator once you get to that.
Oh, advice fees, which is what I was paying, but I wasn't with Oz Super. But that's essentially what I was paying without me even knowing. Investment return, I'm not sure if they've said that here. Balanced was 7.35.
3 days later.
Ooh, okay. So by the time you're 67, you would have ended with nearly $350,000.
So then Kate and I compared that to the stable fund, which has a return of around 5.33%. And that came to $210,000. So comparing that to nearly $350,000 from the other fund, it's around $140,000 difference. I will leave that to you to ponder.
it's a good example to show you how important it is that you're aware of what investment option you're in, because the difference between a stable or a diversified fund and a high growth fund is quite a lot over multiple decades.
That's insane. I hope that, for whoever's looking at this and who's listening, that was just a snapshot of what can happen if you're not aware of the fees that you're paying or the investments that you're invested in. Yes. All of that stuff if you're unaware of that, you could be missing out on hundreds of thousands of dollars just by not knowing at the start. So I think what we're trying to emphasize as well is just being aware of where your money's going. Yeah. Also, it's not that you have to be financially literate at the start to be able to do this, but that you can, over time learn this and become more confident with it. And now, because super isn't entirely, it's definitely not the only investment option, there are actual ETFs and there are shares and everything. And we mentioned last episode about just introducing what ETFs are. But just to recap, what are ETFs, and now moving into the actual logistics of investing, how do we go about that?
So I thought before we jump into ETFs, there is one money misconception that is really, really big, and I feel like just caused a lot of you to go, nah, investing's not for me. So this is it.
There was a money misconception that you referenced in your episode, which was the fact that, I don't have enough money to invest, because a lot of people think you need 1,000, 2,000, which people recommend, but you can start as little as 50 to 100. And that is a worthwhile investment, just to, I guess, again, start off with baby steps and then move to bigger investments once you get more confident with that.
Okay, so now on to ETF investing.
Investing in shares, investing in exchange traded funds, your super does that too. So you may be already invested in some of those products without you knowing it. But to talk a little bit, so shares, let's just pick like CBA, just because everyone knows Commonwealth Bank. You can buy, Commonwealth Bank is listed on the Australian Stock Exchange. You can open up a brokerage account and go.
So for those of you who don't know, brokerage accounts are essentially accounts that you need to buy shares. Whether they're ETFs or just other shares, you need one. So companies like Self-Wealth have it, or major banks like Commonwealth Bank, National Australia Bank, ANZ. Oh, there are so many.
Stock Exchange, you can open up a brokerage account and go and buy a share of Commonwealth Bank and become a shareholder. And then with exchange traded funds, instead of having to buy one individual share of something like Commonwealth Bank or any other company you've got your eye on, you can buy one exchange traded funds and get exposure to all of the top 200 companies in Australia. But I guess if we want to build on that, it doesn't have to be just Australia. There's what we call sort of indices where they track different baskets of companies. So it could be the top 50 companies in Australia. It could be the top 50 property and infrastructure listed companies in Australia. It could be the top 500 US companies. And they're even getting so niche nowadays that you could buy like specific robotic and technology companies. So you might go, hey, I love the robotic sector. I want to be invested in that. I want to own a piece of the pie. I want to get involved. How do I get involved? And you go, hey, I don't really know which robotic company I want, but I just think this is a growing industry. So you can actually buy units in an exchange traded fund that invests in the top like 50 or 100 robotic and technology companies in Australia or overseas. And so exchange traded funds have really changed the world of investing mainly over the last decade, but they've sort of been around a few decades now. They all sort of started with Vanguard Group back in the US, but it's really changed the way that you don't have to make a decision now of which company you want to buy and sell and whether that company's doing good things this week or next week. You can use exchange traded funds to build your investment portfolio without having to make too many decisions at all, except which exchange traded funds you want, what mixture do you want in your portfolio. But it does mean you don't have to worry about the news too much, because you're not going, hey, did some scandal happen to my company today? What sort of hole did they dig for themselves? You can focus more on that overall sector.
100%. I think it's one of the best ways to dip your toes into investing.
Also, I'm just going to remind you, this is not telling you to do this. This is not personal advice, just general advice or a strong suggestion by me. Realistically, it's up to you and your situation.
You're giving the task of choosing investments and the hard stuff to other people. So you're not, I love it because it was so low maintenance for me. I just needed to know the actual investment brand or the company, like Vanguard, just to know that they were okay. But I didn't have to go into detail and go, okay, well, what are these 100 different shares? I have to keep into consideration if one fails, which I've invested a lot of money in, then that means my whole income or my whole investment will decrease, as opposed to I can invest in this fund which has 100 shares already in it. So if one of the shares fails, the 99 others are still going strong. So my money invested will not dip. And because I personally am risk adverse, I just don't like the idea of losing money. And I know a lot of people are the same, which actually prevents a lot of people from even jumping into the field of finance and investing. So I would personally recommend if you're unsure about investing for this to be the place to start.
Yeah. And as you touched on, exchange traded funds give you a really great way to diversify. As you said, the 1 in 100, if one company goes down, the whole ship doesn't go down. And diversification is such an important part of managing your finances and managing your life, really. I think it's an important word, but the essence is not putting all your eggs in one basket. So you're not putting all your money with one fund manager. You're not giving one person all the responsibility for managing your money. And it's always sad when you see the stories on TV that someone had all their money with one fund manager, that something happened, and then they're saying, well, my life savings gone. Like, I've got no retirement money anymore. It's all disappeared. Or they've invested in maybe a company that turned out to be fraudulent, and the company became insolvent and all their money gone because they put it all in one thing. And I think, diversification, if you can take one principle out of today, it is diversification and spreading your risk.
So if you think this is a bit complicated, that is okay, understandable, but please hold on because we are going to address this idea.
For the people who are just very hesitant and going, I don't even know, you don't have to choose a perfect fund at the start. Making sure that you sort of just dip your toes in. Oh yeah, well, this is the top 200. This is a really common one because it's a simple Google. I think all I did was just Google what is a popular safe ETF, and people have blogs which give that information, and it's just maybe about reading 5 different blogs and seeing what pops up the most. And that could be the whole thing. Like, it doesn't have to be that complicated. And I know we've talked about a lot of different aspects of it, but at the end of the day, the information is on Google. It really is. Yeah.
And I guess if you want to get someone to help you, you can get the help of a financial advisor. So no one's technically, unless you go to a financial advisor, get financial advice, no one can actually say to you, hey, you should invest in this specific ETF in Australia. I know like a lot of people just say to their friends, hey, I'm doing this, or on Facebook groups, they'll say, I'm using this and this ETF. But I guess you can find a lot on Google. Facebook groups, there's a lot of, if you're interested in building an ETF portfolio, there's a lot of financial independence Facebook groups that are very active, and everyone is very engaged at building their investment portfolios, and they'll share their approaches. So, I mean, take everything you read with a grain of salt, but it is good to see what other people are doing that have done the research, and you can have a look at what they're looking at as their comparison factors and get in that way. And my other cheap hack is looking at the robo-advisors in Australia. So going to SixPark, having a look at StockSpot, having a look at InvestSmart. And what they do for their clients is they build diversified portfolios. So if you want a high growth ETF portfolio, they'll build it for you. And you can invest in like these pre-mixed portfolios. But if you go to their websites, you can actually see which ETFs they use in their diversified portfolios. So that might give you a starting point as well as a little cheat.
I think the hardest bit is starting. And so by
Yeah.
using those sorts of resources, it really just at least reduces the stress of just going, I don't know what to do at the start.
Yeah.
Because
If you only got $100, you can't afford to go to a financial advisor when that's going to cost a couple of grand for a statement of advice.
Yeah.
So it's more important that you start. Like, you might not make the perfect decision, but if you make that decision's like 80% of the way there, it's a pretty good option, then I think it's more important just to put your foot in the water, put your first $50, $100 in the investment market and learn from there. Because once you've got a bit of money in, you'll be a lot more committed to learning about it on a regular basis.
Exactly. But how do we actually start? Because, and this is more going towards the actual practical side now. We actually do need an investment platform. What do we call it? It's
a brokerage account.
That's right. We need a brokerage account. And so now this is where people dissociate. This is where people just go, brokerage, I quit. But what are these accounts?
Yeah. So you can't just go up to someone and say, hey, can I buy your CBA shares? It's just very hard to do it. So what's happened is that they've created a platform for you to buy and sell shares in different companies and buy and sell units in exchange traded funds. And so what you do is you open up a brokerage account. Like, all the major banks offer brokerage accounts. There's a whole heap of other really popular ones. I mean, if you just search brokerage account comparison sites, you'll find a whole range of different options in Australia. And what that does, it allows you to buy units from other people. So when I'm buying a share in Commonwealth Bank, for example, Commonwealth Bank isn't giving me the share directly. Someone already owns that share. So if you own your Commonwealth Bank share right now, Joe, and I want to buy it from you, what the marketplace does is means I don't ever have to know who you are. You don't know who I am. It all happens in a really frictionless, easy way. So I would just go onto my brokerage account and say, hey, I want to buy a share in Commonwealth Bank. This is the price I'm prepared to pay. And if you, at the same time, want to sell it, you'll go into your brokerage account and say, hey, I want to sell it at this price. And if all the stars align and everything works, and it hits the same price, bam, the sale will go through and the shares will change ownership. But this all happens within seconds, and there's so much technology behind it that's probably very complicated, but the share ownership changes hands in a matter of like milliseconds. And so my brokerage account will take the money out of my account after a couple of days and give it to you. And it all happens seamlessly. And for most of the time, that's how it works. And so it's actually like super easy nowadays to buy and sell, maybe too easy. Shares in ETS, you can do it on your phone, like during the market open hours, like 10 to 4 p.m, Monday to Friday. I can just hop onto my phone, go onto my brokerage app and say, hey, I want to buy shares in this cool company. And I can do it instantly as long as I've got some money there to back it up. And the brokerage account, they do all these nice things for you, but in exchange, they have a fee, because no one does anything for free, do they? So maybe somewhere from $9.50 to $20 for an average order. So they'll take that money out of your settlement as well. And they're going to charge the buyer and they're going to charge the seller. So everyone pays a fee.
Yay.
And different brokerage accounts have different fees. So that's why when you're comparing different ones, you might want to have a look at that. But usually it's somewhere between like $10 and $20.
Yeah, I've heard that Self Wealth does it for $9.50, but I've heard other ones like NAB who would do it for $20, and Commonwealth, I'm not sure, maybe $10 to $20. And I think that's also something really important to just keep in mind, especially if you don't have a brokerage account right now and you want to make one.
Yeah. To
really just look at the options and see, well, if they're offering the same services and I can get one for cheaper when I pay brokerage, then I might as well go for the cheaper option. And and they're very easy to set up. You just need to make an account and then you just put your monies into the funds, and then you can buy whatever shares you want.
I'd just like to add in, because I think it's an important thing to note. It probably sounds really boring, but when you open your brokerage account, make sure they give you a holder identification number, which is what registers your shares against you as an individual. And so you can actually take your shares to any broker you want with that holder identification number. And that's registered through the ASX CHESS system. So if anything ever happens to the broker, if you have that holder identification number that's your own and your shares are on it, you can just move them to another broker. I only mention that because there are some really cheap brokers out there that use a different model where they have one mega HIN at the top. So the company will hold the holder identification number, and they'll just have everyone in everyone's shares and purchases are held under that one HIN. So if anything ever happens, it's a lot more effort to move things across, and it gets a bit messy. So
how do you know if yours is your own or if it's attached to the brokerage?
Yeah, so for most of the large brokers that have that $10 to $20 price tag, they are a holder identification number system. So because it does cost more money and they have to pay higher fees, which is part of the reason the brokerage fees are higher. But you can actually look in the FAQ or ask them, will I receive my own individual holder identification number? And once you set up the brokerage account, you should receive a letter in the post, because the Australian Stock Exchange still does things via snail mail.
They do.
And it should say, thanks for opening your brokerage account. Like whatever platform you use, you should get a blue letter. It is on blue paper in the mail from the Australian Stock Exchange, and it'll say your holder identification number is X000 number, something like that. And then you can also log into the share registries, which are the companies that manage the administration of your investments. And you should, if it is your own individual holder identification number, you can log in using that number and your postcode, and you can verify that the investment is in your name. So that's always, no one ever talks about this because it's kind of boring and it's admin, but some of the smaller brokers popping up that are offering $5 or less per trade, they're using that custodial model where there's a mega HIN and everything's sort of held in beneficial ownership underneath, which is completely legal and it's completely fine, but it's just, there's more hassle at the end of the day if anything were to happen, which I hope it wouldn't. But as someone who's like wants to manage their own risks, I think it's really important to focus on that.
Okay, so to recap, first we need a brokerage platform or a brokerage account, and you can get that via your bank, or you can get that via platforms like SelfWealth, and you need that to buy any sort of share. It doesn't have to be an ETF, it can just be an individual share, but you need it anyway. Then you want to know their fees. How much do they cost? Compare and contrast them, and to be honest, if they're a little bit cheap, then probably you're getting what you pay for, because you might not get a HIN number like what Kate was just mentioning. Okay, so now onto the fees for ETFs.
For most people, the management fee will be the key thing to look for. So when you go to someone like Vanguard Australia's website, or you go to BetaShares Australia or State Street or BlackRock, and you have a look at their website, and you can look at all the different exchange traded funds available, and you can actually just Control F and search for management fee, and it might be like, the lowest cost Australian one in Australia is 0.07% per annum. So that's how much they're taking out as a percentage.
So I actually really want to emphasize how important it is to check the management fee, because a 1% difference can actually impact a lot. So right now I'm real time just looking at the Money Smart calculator, and I've got an initial deposit of $5,000, and I'm going to deposit monthly with $200, and this is going to be over 40 years. So let's just say we have 5% to start with. That's like the one with a cheaper management fee, and that will give us around about $250,000 of returns. But say if that management fee was 1% higher, so you decrease your interest rate, you're only going to get $160,000, which means nearly $100,000 you lose out just from the management fee. Over 40 years, by the way. This isn't like over 1 year, it's over 40 years. But over 40 years, you're losing $100,000 just from fees. That is pretty crazy.
I guess that's one thing why people often don't notice the management fee, is because if you went to see a financial advisor, they would send you a big bill and expect you to pay it. But when you use exchange traded funds or managed funds, they're not sending you any bills. They just take the fees right out there, and that's part of the investment product, and that's what you agree to upon purchasing. So that's something to be really aware of. And so in terms of narrowing down the hundreds of exchange traded fund choices to a few that you might like, I think the first step is going, hey, what do I actually want to invest in? Like, what's the goal today? Do I want to just invest in Australian companies? Do I want to have some exposure to US companies? Am I specifically looking to invest in robotics today? So having an idea of what you're looking for to start with, and then going to each of the major ETF providers in Australia, like Vanguard, BetaShares, BlackRock, iShares, VanEck, I think, and there's a few other ETF securities. There's a few other sort of smaller ones as well. Looking at their website, and then some of them will have filters as well. So you can actually go, hey, I'm interested in an Australian top 200 ETF. What's Vanguard's option? What's BetaShares' option? What's iShares' option? And look at all the different options available that fulfill what you're looking for. And then you can more accurately compare them side by side, because if you're just looking at the pool of like hundreds of ETFs, you're going to go, hey, I have no idea how to compare these, because you're not comparing it apples and apples. Because one ETF might be doing US robotics and one might be doing Australian top 50 companies, and they're not comparable. Like, it's the same legal structure, but they're not really comparable things. So it wouldn't make sense to compare the fees for a really niche ETF with the top 200 Australian companies. I feel like if you're learning and you're getting started, just looking for the ETF of the top 200 Australian companies is a good research activity, even if you don't choose to invest in that kind of exchange traded fund. Just using it as a research activity to sort of get your bearings. Go, I'm going to look for every ETF that tracks the top 200 Australian companies in Australia. And then if you want to take it to the next step, you're going to go, I'm going to get a Google Sheet open, and I'm going to write down what everyone's what index they're tracking, what their management fees are, what the total funds under management is, so the total amount invested in that ETF. So that's all the other people that have put their money into it, because that's important to know, because the higher the funds under management gives you more liquidity, and it means that that ETF is more likely to be around for a while. If it's under 50 million, that's probably like a red flag, because that's quite small for an ETF, especially for the top 200 Australian one. For a niche one like robotics, it might be a bit different. But just get a Google Sheet, write down all the subcategories you see on their information page, and then go through their product disclosure statement, go through their fact sheet, talk to their team, and write down the key features of all of the top 200 ETFs in Australia.
So Kate here is not saying the 200 ETFs, but the ETFs that just show the top 200 stocks. So don't worry, you do not have to look at hundreds upon hundreds of ETFs, unless if that's what you want to do, of course. But for now, I would really, really suggest looking at, researching big companies and doing that via Google or Reddit. Reddit is actually phenomenal. I love it. I just ask questions via that website, and there's this Oz Finance thread as well, which I find so useful because people just give their honest opinions back. You can ask any sort of questions and they will, you don't have to take everything to heart, but you just learn from them. And now we're going to go use the calculator for compound interest between ETFs.
Well. So I just said initial deposit. Say we're starting off small. We've just saved up $100. And I would say let's find an ETF to start with.
Yeah, go to Vanguard's website and have a look for something.
Yep, let's do it. So they have our products.
Now, Vanguard's website is very antiquated, and they focus on function over aesthetics.
Yeah. It does the job.
Yeah.
Okay. I was thinking we could go with VAS because that's the Vanguard Australian shares.
So you can do this and have a look at all of the different options, and they display similar information on each of the major ETF provider websites. So you can see here where it says on the right-hand side, assets under management, AUM. So it says ETF AUM 7.45 billion. We're looking in the billions of dollars. That's a good sign that there's high liquidity. It's it's an ETF that a lot of people use. Super funds will use this one, financial advisors, wholesale clients, fund managers. Like a lot of people are using this if it's in the billions of dollars. So that's, as I said before, if it's like a small, like a $10 million AUM, that might be a warning sign. But if we're in the billions, that means there's like high liquidity. There's going to be like millions of units trading every day, which means it's very easy to get in and out as well. And then you can also see their management fees. So 0.1%. So that's really quite low in Australia. And that's what they're taking out each year to run the thing. And because the assets under management, the amount of money in this ETF is so high, it allows them to really reduce the management fee because they've got such a big pool of money. They can afford to make a really low management fee and still be a viable business. So that's one of the advantages of having that as well.
Yeah, and then so you would pay $87.99 to buy that share. Yeah, enough. You could pay for that if you had $100 to spare. And then they also do have what you mentioned before, the product disclosure statement. So just explaining what they do, their performance, but also you can see that right here as well.
Every single one you look at, it'll tell you what it tracks. And so this is the top 300 companies in Australia. And you can see here you've got different timeframes as well. So what's it telling us? Inception. So that's since it started. It's always good with smaller funds to find out what that inception date was, because it might only be a year or two. So I guess if you scroll down, they might even say when they started this one, because there's a little asterisk.
2009.
Okay, so this has been operating for quite a while. So there is a good track record. So you can actually see that this has been going for a long time. Has it been doing what it aimed to do? And what is total? We're looking at 9%.
Okay, so we can use that as the value then in our calculator. Since inception, around 9% returns per annum is what the PA stands for. And
2009, it was right after the global financial crisis. So it was quite a good time to start. So the 10 years is closer to 7%. So you may want to try anywhere between 7 to 9%, just because the market has had quite a good run since 2009.
That's true. More realistic. Let's say 7% then.
Most people do chuck in 7%. It's always better to under than overestimate your return. Because you might think you're going to reach, if you put in like 10%, you might think you're going to reach your goal a lot quicker than you might in reality.
For sure. So then we have $100, and say a regular deposit, you really don't want to do it too regularly. So let's say $50, and let's do fortnightly, which seems pretty reasonable. Cool. And then for the big reveal.
So for 10 years, here we go.
That's a lot. Oh my gosh.
So $50 a fortnight over 10 years ends up being $13,000, and then it's telling you how much interest you made on top of that. So that would include capital growth. So the companies in that top 300 have actually increased in value, and it would also include income. So many of the companies in the Australian top 300 also pay, you've probably heard of dividends before.
Yeah, that's right.
So they pay part of their income. So all the large banks, they'll pay part of their income they receive each year out to the shareholders. So you can actually choose with an ETF to reinvest that as well. So that helps the snowball effect over time. But I guess you can see it's amazing. You just think $50 a fortnight over 10 years. And for most,
nearly $6,000 for doing nothing but just putting some $50 in a fortnight.
Yeah, let's change it to a 40-year time frame and just sort of see how crazy that is.
I love this. This is what we do in our downtime.
Look at this.
Oh, this makes me go, Just wow.
And this is where you start to really see the benefit of compound interest, because it's showing you that you put in a total of 52,000. So you diligently put your $50 in a fortnight over 40 years. But because you got to take advantage of capital growth and income, and look at that snowball, most of the return here, 233,000, was not actually your money at all. It was from growth and income. So that's a lot of money for just putting $50 a fortnight away on a regular basis.
Nearly $250,000 of just passive growth. You don't have to really worry about it, apart from the fact that you just put money in it consistently. They always do talk about consistency in time with finances.
Yeah. And I think that's the hard part, isn't it? Like, it's hard to think, how can I do this for 40 years? Like, that's so long away. But it's, if you start early and you put just a small amount aside on a regular basis, it just is a game changer. And you hear the stories about like the janitors and the nurses and things that die with multi-million-dollar estates and no one ever knew, because they just put the small amounts aside on a regular basis. They didn't buy flashy cars. They didn't do crazy things. They just committed to a regular strategy. And like, it's insane how much of a change it makes. And then if you can, maybe once you're in your 30s or 40s, you can afford to add more than $50 a fortnight in. Maybe you can put a couple of $100 in a fortnight, and that will really supercharge your wealth. Like, you're going to be in the millions of dollars.
For sure. And I think, because this is pretty unrealistic, usually if you make an income weekly or fortnightly, it would be somewhere around 1,000 at least. And so $50 is only a small portion of that. Sometimes they recommend, a percentage of it that gets automatically deposited into it. So say if you had 150, which is pretty reasonable, again, fortnightly, all of that's still the same. And you end up getting, nearly 700.
Getting close to $1 million.
Over 40 years, you're essentially nearly a millionaire just by putting $150. That's a pair of expensive shoes, or that's a cheap bike. Just
think, if you have a pay rise or an unexpected windfall, if you do earn $10K in the lottery, or you get a bonus, if you just put that extra like 1, 2, 5, 10 grand in as an additional contribution, it's just going to torpedo everything.
Okay, so now we've reached the end, or nearly the end, and here are the key takeaways from Kate about super and investing.
Yeah, I think it's just good to keep in mind that super is your money, and making a few right decisions now, as you've seen in the calculator, will have tremendous impact over your lifetime. If you don't know where your super is right now, head to the MyGov website, log in, put in your tax file number, and find any lost super you've got around. Or if you've just forgot all the logins, go about and sort that out so you can actually log into your super account, find out where you're invested in, and then go from there and explore, is there another investment option or a super provider? What are you currently paying in your fees? And sort of just give yourself like an assessment of your super and what it's doing and what you want it to do. And just spending a few hours sorting it out, learning about it, is really important. It's going to be the best time you ever spend, as you can see, over your lifetime. It's just spending a few hours is going to change like hundreds of thousands of dollars potentially. Just keeping an eye on that. Don't get too overwhelmed by ETFs. There's plenty of forums and groups that you can talk to, ask questions, always look for multiple sources. Not everybody on the internet knows what they're talking about. So get ideas from different people, listen to some different podcasts. Even people that run ETF companies in Australia, a lot of them have been interviewed on different finance podcasts in Australia, including mine. So have a listen to those and you can get a feel of how it works. Listen to a few, maybe 5 different ETF episodes, and then you might go, hey, what are the common threads? Pick out some of the key pieces and the action points from there. So there's so many resources out there and great books. I mean, if you go to the library, there's a lot of Australian personal finance writers putting out books now. There's heaps of resources out there if you just go looking.
Yeah, for sure. And I was looking through your episode list, and I would anyone, again, listening, watching, also go to How to Money, because I've seen the episodes where you go into super, you go into EDFs, you interview people who are in that field already. So it's all these podcasts are so readily available. So many resources.
They're free.
Available. I know. Yay. So thank you so much for existing as well, for creating for the podcast, for the resources, because it's not just How to Money. Rask, was it? Rask.
Yeah,
Finance?
if you look at Rask Education, there's heaps of free personal finance courses there as well, which I sort of help create. So if you're interested in a free online course, there's another option for you.
So to condense all of that, where can we find you?
howtomoney.online, or if you're on Apple or Spotify podcasts, you can find me talking on How to Money or the Australian Finance Podcast.
So I hope you enjoyed that. That was our final episode with Kate Campbell, and there is a lot of information. If you're a bit confused or you have questions, then email itsjjyang@gmail.com and find us on podcasts or YouTube, and all the links will be in the show notes. So see you next time.